Welcome all to Care Part 2, What are my ongoing needs with ALS MND? For this webinar, we will have both English and Spanish captions available. If you're joining us live on Zoom, please check the chat box as we're adding the instructions right now. And if you're watching the recording, you will find the video description instructions on how to activate the subtitles. Thank you to our sponsors, Amylyx and Biogen. Without the support of our industry partners, this webinar series would not be possible. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathy Cummings, Executive Director of the International Alliance of ALS MND Associations, and I'm joined today by an incredible panel who will provide you with their input on the ongoing needs for ALS MND. Nick Goldup is our moderator, and he's the Director of Care Improvement at the MND Association of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Joining him are Dr. Wendy Johnston, a neurologist from Canada and director of an ALS clinic, and Sara Feldman, senior physical therapist and assistive technology professional from the United States. We will also hear from Albert Koo, who is an adventurer, a lawyer, and a person living with ALS from Malaysia, and he'll be sharing his experience and viewpoint as a person living with ALS MND. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Nick Goldup, who's our moderator for today. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to the webinar today on the ongoing needs of ALS and MND. It's great to have the opportunity to moderate this session. So thank you to Kathy and to the Alliance. I'm really looking forward to this for a while, so I'm sure it's going to be great. So welcome to everybody for joining us. We've got a lot to fit into a short time, so we'll try our best to accommodate questions at the end of the session, and Albert will join us for that session. And you can also write questions in the chat box or the Q&A section, so please do feel free to do that. So without further ado, I wanted to invite our panelists, Wendy and Sara, to introduce themselves. So perhaps we can start with Wendy. Perhaps you can briefly give us an introduction to yourself.
Hi, I'm a neurologist. I'm in Edmonton, Canada, which is in the far north. It snowed yesterday, sadly. I've started 2 ALS clinics, first in Portland, Oregon, which was around for nearly 10 years, and then here in Edmonton. The importance of multidisciplinary care has been quite evident to me and is a priority in my work, but I am also a trialist. I do clinical trials for people with ALS, and I do information seeking and communication needs for people with ALS as my research focus.
Thanks, Wendy. And Sara? Oh, you're on mute. I had to say it at least once today. You get the badge.
Don't worry, it told me to. So good morning. I'm the physical therapist at an ALS clinic at Temple University in Philadelphia. And I've been the physical therapist at an ALS clinic since 1994. I'm also the assistive technology professional, and I do the outcome measures for our clinical trials. And it is my honor to be with all of you today to share my experience over this time.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So to get started with the conversation, I wanted to introduce you to Albert Koo. He's a person living with ALS based in Malaysia, and he will share with us what his experiences have been living with ALS.
Hello, everyone. My name is Albert Koo. I'm from Malaysia. If you know the small little place that is actually above Singapore and is below Thailand. I'm 52 years old of age. I'm married with a child. I've actually been an active member of the sports and also adventure. I love hiking, I love climbing. I love to do all sorts of all these outdoor activities. However, until the year of 2017, where suddenly certain of these initial onset of it started appearing with me, and I was finally diagnosed with ALS in the year of 2018. I'm now wheelchair bound. I'm no longer able to do any sort of activities of the outdoor adventures that I love to do, although I still go on camping trips with some of my friends. These are actually among some of the activities that I'm still get to do until to this very day. And I'm actually a lawyer by profession, as I have actually mentioned, and I have still my own little practice where I am still working actively in order for me to maintain the sanity and also to continue to keep myself relevant in the ongoing fight against the ALS. The ongoing needs of what I'm actually facing right now is that after being diagnosed, I was actually kind of like lost. I was not able to actually know what I was actually doing until I found resources and also from the net and also the member organization that actually helped me to actually pave the way for me to actually prepare myself for the situation in which I'm in. What I've actually been doing is that I have actually allowed myself to read as much and to actually indulge in doing activities and also to actually learn from other pals of what they are going through. And by learning what they are going through, I kind of like prepare myself, anticipate what is there for me or what is there that I need to be expecting in the coming future. That is actually something that what I have actually been doing. So I think what is important for my needs is that I need to be prepared for myself, my physical being, and also at the same time, I need to be prepared for what is going to happen eventually when I'm no longer able to actually care and tend to myself. The things that I have actually been doing is that I have actually been preparing myself for the eventualities. I've actually learned the eye tracking and also able to learn and prepare myself of a few things. For instance, I've actually prepared the last will and testament, power of attorney, and things that I need my family to be aware of, or the things that I need to actually do. The recommendations that I can actually give to some of the pals, but I believe that there will be far better ideas from other people. But this is actually my own personal view, is that one of the first things that I have actually learned for me to actually deal with this sickness that I have is to embrace it, to accept that I am not well. I no longer fight it. I learn to embrace it and to accept it, that this is actually going to be part of me. Every challenges that actually come my way, I take it as a learning process. I'm learning new way of doing things. That is actually the first thing that I actually do. So I believe that that is one of the recommendations that I can actually share with others on what other things that we can actually do. The other things is that we have to actually find peace. And by finding peace, what I have actually been doing is that I have continued to spend time meditating, in prayer, and also in some spiritual exercise. That is the second thing that I would actually recommend. And finally, the third thing is learning to be grateful for the lives that we have. To be surrounded by our friends and family members, and also at all time to live in the moment, to be grateful and to live in the moment and to live in the present moment, and never to regret the things that happen. So every moment counts for me. And I live by a certain philosophy that you only die once, but you are living every day. That is actually what I would live by until to the very end. Thank you.
I think you're back to me now, hopefully. Yes. Hi. So thank you, Albert. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. Some really important points and recommendations there for everyone to consider. So a great way to start the conversation with our panelists. So thank you for taking the time to record that for us. And as I said, we're going to hear from Albert a little bit later on. So on with today's agenda, we're going to work through addressing various topics, and we've only got about 5 minutes for each question. So starting with early considerations, we actually have a whole webinar on the conversation at diagnosis, which you can access through the Alliance website. So please do have a look at that. But I think a good place to start is discussing the early considerations after the acceptance of diagnosis. And Albert spoke to some of these points, but my first question really is, what are the most common questions or themes that you address when you meet with pals and CALs? So let's start with Wendy. on that?
So difficult question, because as so much in ALS is individual, it can be quite individual. And I find that people often come in blurting out their worst fears and needing reassurance, kind of jumping to all the things that they often have read about in between the diagnosis and their first kind of management clinic visit. As the neurologist in the clinic, when we see people in the multidisciplinary clinic, people often have questions for me about why, what's the science, what are the therapies, what research is going on. They've come in with a list of things they've read about drugs that are out there. And so there's a lot of questions around, what do I do now? Is, I think, the general theme is, okay, I've got ALS, what do I do now? And I kind of turn that around and say, well, who are you and how do you want to hold on to who you are in the face of this disease? Because that centers people on their own personal goals, which again could be quite individual. So questions often come up about diet and exercise. How long should I work? Should I work? And that I turn that around and I say, well, we'll have to talk about diet and exercise, very important things, but who are you in your life? Is your identity bound up with the work you do? So don't abandon it if it's a big part of who you are. Let's see how we could adapt to that. Albert said he's a lawyer. Lawyers could do a lot to adapt. Construction workers have a bigger problem depending on how the ALS is affecting them. So sort of reflecting back to people to say, I can tell you more about how ALS may affect you, but how do you want to be and who do you want to be and how can we support you to meet those goals?
And that's true. We also within the UK see different information requirements from different people, be that the person living with ALS or their family members or those close to them, who we quite often see want and need different levels of information at that point in time, and that may
very
differ
much so
from person to person.
And sometimes we invite them to separate, and each can satisfy the things that are uppermost in their mind.
Sarah, can I ask you the same question?
Absolutely. And like Dr. Johnston said, some of those same questions come up often. And as was mentioned in the first CARE webinar as well, one of the big questions that people ask is, am I a fast or slow progressor? So, where am I on that timeline? That's kind of an overall question. And then just to dig a little bit deeper, and Dr. Johnston just mentioned it, as a physical therapist, what I get asked a lot is about exercise. So people want to know, can I exercise? What kind of exercises can I do? As you know, muscle weakness is one of the first signs or symptoms. So they want to know, can I exercise and make it stronger? And since we're talking about the care progression here, what my answer is different depending on where they are. Like you just mentioned, where they are in the progression. Are they early on? Are they later? And what they do exactly. So if somebody comes to me and says about adding exercise onto their day and they're already a construction worker or they clean houses, that's going to be a lot different. My answer is going to be different versus are they doing a sit down job or that kind of thing. So we do get a lot of questions on that. And there's other things I could probably do an entire webinar on the physical therapy question. So I won't go too much more into that, but really I look at it where they are in the disease progression and try and get a snapshot. And again, it changes. So what I might recommend at one point is going to be different at another point.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just picking up on the theme of information and sort of family and support, really. I mean, ALS and MND greatly impacts family, and we've been carrying out a lot of work in the UK around support for families and how we can go about doing that. So I suppose my second question is, can you tell us about what you do when you first start interacting with family members and their roles and the evolution to being a caregiver? Wendy, can I ask you that first?
Well, the evolution that you mentioned is the first thing is that when people are diagnosed and start coming to clinic, They may not have a loved one with them, and they may be viewing their health as entirely their own concern. And so the spouse or family member that may accompany them doesn't see themselves as a caregiver, and they're maybe even uncomfortable with the term. I like the UK term, the carer, which is little. Someone said, if my wife is the caregiver, am I the caretaker? You know, it's funny language English. So they're invited to be part of the visits from diagnosis. And in fact, we specifically say, is there anyone else you want to come to visits? Do you want to put them on the phone? Do you want to Zoom with a family member, particularly in the period of adjustment? And that invites family members to return and be part of the care as well. The family may not be biologic family, and identifying who your family is really important. And sometimes I allude to teams, and I know in the palliative care world, I've read books about creating a team and maybe having the captain who's not you, and start having your wider social group who are distressed and want to help, but they can't keep talking to the person with ALS. So there has to be someone else who feels those questions. And that might be someone who's not the immediate loved one. It might be someone who's concerned in the family or a good friend. So creating the team, starting the network is a very important step. Recognizing the impact on the immediate family members is very important. And we're very fortunate to have a social worker in our group, and we have access to psychologists, and they often will, with the family members, identify community resources so that the family members feel supported and can explore their own feelings and concerns outside of the relationship and bring back strength to the relationship from this support that they could get professionally or informally.
I think that's right. That impact on family members and how people can be supported within their community, and that impact almost overnight of becoming a carer to your loved one, where you had a very different relationship with, you know, the previous day. You know, it's a complete sledgehammer that hits home. I can only imagine. So, Sarah, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I agree with both of you, and I think if you're on this webinar to get some new information, then what we're saying is ALS MND is a family disease. You know, it's going to impact everyone. And as you mentioned, Dr. Johnston, some people might come in initially on their own. You know, they go to doctor visits people go to doctor visits on their own. It's you know, not unusual, but as your ongoing needs change and as everything happens in your life, then that may change, and even your primary caregiver may change. So in the clinic side, we also try and get to know the caregiver. So we get to know the person living with ALS MND, and we want to know who their caregiver is. We want to interact with them. We want to find out how they're doing. And as was mentioned earlier, it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be some combination. Somebody might come to some visit, some to another. We always hope somebody steps in to help, but again, that also isn't always the case. And we can't control how the relationships were in the past or how they're going to evolve. So as well as the social worker, we also try and get the mental health specialist involved to address, you know, what's happening, that new news that they have, and then as the needs change. We know that changes the dynamic too. So somebody who might be a caregiver early on might have to switch. And as was mentioned as well, bringing people in from the outside too. Maybe a sister who lives far away can't be there physically, but can help organize things, can organize Zoom calls, things like that. So we know it affects the family, and we try to support people where they are, and everyone's different, but that's the nature of the diagnosis and dealing with families. So let people play to their strengths would be my final, you know, point to that, is what can you do to help out?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm going to shift the conversation now onto some multidisciplinary care and multidisciplinary teams. And we know that access to multidisciplinary teams is really important. And not everyone can access care and multidisciplinary care in the same way. It depends on people's location and where they live, for example. So there's two parts to the question, really. I think perhaps it's worth just going through what we mean by multidisciplinary teams and why they're so important. And then what is your recommendation if there's no access to a multidisciplinary clinic or team where people are watching this webinar from? So Sarah, can we start with you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, multidisciplinary team can be the key to ensuring the person living with ALS MND is receiving the care they need at the appropriate time. So, you know, from it is a full team. Usually it's the neurologist, nurse specialist, and a care coordinator or social worker, who I think of as kind of the frontline people, the ones who are taking the calls in and out. And then our rehab team is a speech language pathologist, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, an assistive technology professional if you have one available. Sometimes people also use a physiatrist or a rehab doc for that first rehab team member. Pulmonary, so a pulmonologist, respiratory therapist, or a respiratory physiotherapist, depending on your country. A dietitian, nutritionist, that's going to be another key person. And then large clinics or a lot of places have a research coordinator, somebody who comes in to talk to you about both clinical trials and other trials that may be going on within the clinic. And then I know in the United States and some other countries, they would have a representative from an ALS organization. So it may be the ALS Association, or in our clinics, ALS Hope Foundation. You know, a representative might be there to interact and help people with different resources. So clinics can be run in different ways as well. I think the gold standard in my mind is to have all the team members available on that day for the person to come in. So the person comes into the clinic, they may be there all morning or all afternoon, and then they meet with every team member. So at our clinic, every team member meets with the person at every time. And it's really our neurologist, Dr. Terry Hyman-Patterson, who set the bar for that. And she thinks it's really important that, like, for example, as a physical therapist, I get to know you and get to see how your family dynamics are and what you're doing. And again, talk to you about what your activities are, not just go in and say, hey, you need a brace. So I have some more interaction before that. And so it's important for the whole team. And I know some clinics don't meet on that first diagnosis day, but we do meet with the person when they're first diagnosed, so that we can start to give them the tools they might need right away. So I think that's also important. A lot of times it takes several months to get the diagnosis, so they've already been living with whatever issues they have. So, you know, they already know that there's something going on. So let's meet them, let's give them what they, you know, can leave with. And then, so that speaks to that importance that everything can be done in a timely manner. I know some clinics do it where they do much more of a triage. So somebody, either the nurse or the doctor, will meet with the person and then decide who they would see for the team, or they refer them back out. But if somebody has, so of course, I believe that the multidisciplinary team is so important. I know Dr. Johnston does as well. But if they don't have access to that, then I think listening to Albert this morning, you know, he talked about how he accessed information. I know there's a lot of resources out there. The International Alliance of ALS MND Associations on their website has many resources and a lot of information for people about what the multidisciplinary team does and who the different players are. May be a little different in different countries, you know, who does what, whether it's a physio versus an occupational therapist or whatever. But certainly that site in the US, we have the ALS Association has a lot of resources. Les Turner, ALS Foundation, I Am ALS, Your ALS Guide. There's just a lot of resources available on the web if you have access to that. In Europe, Australia, Canada, Israel, you know, that, and it's important to have this kind of thing so that if your community speech therapist doesn't know if your AAC can accept different languages or what software it needs to be able to read in a different direction, you know, these are resources then that people can reach out to.
And a great point, Sarah. And do also the MNDA Association, we have a lot of information there on multidisciplinary care. It's very, I mean, I always say it's very complicated. You know, can you imagine navigating all of those services and more that you just mentioned? It can be very complicated and daunting. And we saw value in a coordinator role. So we're fortunate to be able to support in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, a coordinator to help in those clinics to navigate those systems.
And to speak to that, Nick, I think the organizations are a really excellent resource, and they can help support, clinics in different countries.
Wendy, can I ask for your input into that one?
I'm not sure there's much more to say, but I'll say this, that there's you can talk about multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. And so our goal is, when we do it, much as Sarah described, we have multiple team members in the same space, and we meet and talk about the day and what we've learned. And we've learned that people with ALS and their families reveal different things to different team members. And over time, an individual family member or person with ALS might identify or click with a certain team member. We also find that people will tell the neurologist one thing and the rehabilitation doctor another thing. And we have to, at the end of the day, put it together to say, well, he told me this. And I'll say, well, he told me this. And we put it together to come up with a care plan. So maybe I'll tackle the question of what to do if you don't have a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary team available to you. That could be geographic. It could be simply that in your country, there isn't that ideal multidisciplinary clinic available. If in your region, and I'm talking about 6 hours, anywhere close, there is a multidisciplinary clinic, there's a lot to be said for going at least once. And then the team members there, certainly where I live in Northern Alberta, they're quite used to liaising with people in the home community. And that's true across Canada, is that the people in the clinic have the expertise, but they're commonly supporting professionals in the home environment of the person that they're talking to. With the advent of easier communication, we've always had telehealth in Northern Alberta, but that's hospital-based. Now that we're comfortable and we have secure access to these platforms, we're doing a lot more of our interdisciplinary care remotely. So we've opened up our multidisciplinary clinic to having multidisciplinary visits where we go into a room and it's the computer we're talking to, and we each come in turn and treat that as the visit for that individual. If you don't have in your area a multidisciplinary clinic to liaise with your home resources, identifying and building your own team is a possibility, so that you may have a physical therapist in your town, and they may be quite willing to work with you and to look at materials that have been downloaded from the web or from the ALS MND Association in your country. So I've been very impressed that people with ALS bring professionals to them, and they can build a team, and that team ultimately may become a multidisciplinary clinic one day, simply from the advocacy of the first person with ALS that gets them together.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to zoom in on one aspect of multidisciplinary care, which is nutrition. I think on your list, you were going through them. I think you mentioned that, and so we know it's key. I just wondered, maybe starting with you, Sarah, what are your top recommendations or sort of best practice in terms of nutrition?
So it's interesting that you say it's, like you're zooming in that one thing, but if you're looking at a multidisciplinary clinic, there are input that, the occupational therapist can do, the physical therapist can do. So of course, we would have them have a consult with a nutritionist, because that's the person who's going to determine what are your caloric needs and how can you meet them. Do you have to add some high calorie supplements, protein supplements? We're talking about ongoing care, so it's going to be different early on. Sometimes people are interested in losing weight, and so the nutritionist wants to talk to them about the importance of keeping their weight up, how that supports your body. But then as perhaps you have difficulty managing eating regular food, the speech language pathologist can talk to you about changes that you can make in your dietary consistency changes to help with making the food softer so it's easier for you to consume, adding extra calories to that. And the occupational therapist can talk to you about how, if you're the one who has to manage cutting up the food or if the feeding yourself is the problem, different like devices, large handles, things like that can help you. So it still remains part of the full multidisciplinary team. And then, if somebody has true difficulties with eating or feeding themselves and their weight is really dropping, then they talk to them about a feeding tube. And that's a different way to get those calories in, so again, it's an ongoing discussion where early on it might be, well, can you just add extra calories to what you're already eating? Can you change the consistency? And then getting up to an alternate way, and a feeding tube is where you would put a tube through the outside of your stomach into the outside into the stomach. So and also hydration is also important when we're talking about nutrition. And again, the full disciplinary team gets involved, because then you're talking about the speech therapist will talk to you about whether you need to change the consistency of your liquids that you're taking in. The PT and OT may talk to you about now how does that impact going to the bathroom? How do you do that aspect of it? Because people a lot of times cut back on what they're intaking because of having to use the bathroom. So nutrition is absolutely key, but it still is a multidisciplinary issue.
Mm. And again, there's some great resources out there on guiding people through this sort of minefield of nutrition. And I've seen some lovely information globally that's been put together on this space.
Yeah, and
Wendy.
Dr. Al-Jalabi, I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, please.
I was just going to say, he mentioned something that you have, my tube, about feeding tube.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I think it's a short video which helps people to understand the sort of pros and cons, so to speak, to allow people to have that choice. Wendy, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'm going to just pick up on a couple of points that Sara brought up in that the multidisciplinary team has input and will help educate people about the importance of nutrition. ALS is a catabolic disease, and that means that you use more calories when you have ALS. And if you think about it, with weak muscles, you're trying to ask weaker muscles to do the same work that the full complement of muscle cells did before. So if you have a dog sled and you suddenly say, well, I'm going to let 3 of the dogs go, but they're pulling the same load, those dogs get hungry and thirsty. And so similarly, the body is working harder to maintain function when you have weakness from ALS. And this is usually manifested by weight loss. And I tell my patients that we're like a well baby clinic. We're going to weigh you because weight loss is the enemy. We don't want you to lose weight. We want you to maintain your weight in whatever way we can. Each individual person on the team can identify when there's concerns. People who have early breathing weakness can actually use up a lot of calories because, you breathe all the time. And so that might be the trigger to say, well, it's not just the calories in. Your breathing muscles need a bit of a break. Can we help your breathing muscles by maybe having them rest overnight with breathing support? Can we do breathing exercises so the lungs aren't stiff, so your lung muscles don't have to work so hard? So that's where respiratory supports can actually support your nutrition. It's really important for comfort to address hydration and intake for constipation. Constipation is very prevalent, certainly in Western societies as people get older, and it's prevalent in people with disabling illnesses because they can't exercise as much. So the importance of hydration to maintaining good bowel function is really something we emphasize. And in fact, I had one gentleman who was very resistant to having a feeding tube until I pointed out that we would be able to get his liquids into him and he would no longer be constipated. And he was on that right away. So the meaning of the supports of hydration and nutrition need to be tailored to what's happening to an individual with ALS so that they can make a decision about how to support ongoing good nutrition and hydration. And each of the team members has a role in identifying where the calories are going and supporting decision-making about how to keep those calories coming in.
When we were getting ready for this webinar, Wendy, I know you indicated that the sort of number one fear that you see from people living with MND and ALS, sort of linked to this, is the fear of choking. And I just wondered what your thoughts were in terms of how you can help people living with ALS in this area. You know, what would you say?
It's something that comes up all the time, and unfortunately, it's still quite prevalent in media coverage. And it's a throwaway line. You'll see it on Twitter. Oh, you know, ALS patients, they choke to death. And so you're really fighting against a huge amount of misinformation that keeps rolling on. So if we identify what choking means, to me, choking is when like my carrot goes down the wrong way and I'm like, oh. And we've all experienced that. But when we talk about breathing difficulties, some people with ALS view the idea that your breathing gets weaker as, well, then eventually you'll choke to death as being a breathing symptom. So exploring what it means to individuals and addressing the specific concerns can help quite a bit. People with ALS, just like everyone else, will have episodes of choking, and they can be very frightening. And you're coughing and trying to clear a secretion, trying to clear a piece of food. And it just wipes you out in terms of energy. So that experience can translate into fears for the future. So addressing how we manage choking, if someone does have swallowing difficulties but is eating a regular diet by choice, for example, family members are taught how to deal with the choking episode, how to help people through it. Sarah's nodding, because there's strategies to deal with the swallowing, the choking sensation if it happens. But people in general don't have airway obstruction. So airway obstruction is like, you know, the piece of steak, the Heimlich maneuver that's legendary. That doesn't really happen very often, especially in people who are listening and working with the team to manage their dietary quality, the consistency. Addressing whether breathing difficulties or the idea that breathing gets weaker is actually behind choking is also helpful. And then reflecting back that we've looked at this, the ALS community has examined this for many years, decades, to say, well, what does happen to people? How do they die? And addressing fear of death, whether it's introduced by fear of, you know, choking to death or not, to say, well, people with ALS live well and have a peaceful death, and that's the goal. And we don't see people choke to death. That's just a unfortunate, I wouldn't say fairy tale, Grimm's fairy tale.
It's certainly a question I've seen many times over here. Yeah, Sarah, you were nodding away.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear the same?
Yes, yeah. So I wouldn't have too much to add. I mean, we do teach people the Heimlich in case there is a choking episode. Like Dr. Johnston said, it can happen to anyone. But no, I don't have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on. I'm going to change. I'm in the office. The light just came on, so all of a sudden I probably changed appearance. But there you go. So I'm going to just change the order of the question I'm going to ask you next, which is while we're on the subject of multidisciplinary care and support, I was just thinking about assistive devices. Maybe we can talk about those now, which is, you know, assistive devices are there to help. How do you approach their use? And I know, Sarah, this is your world. I know you're a global expert on assistive devices, and then we'll talk a bit about voice banking after that. But what would you say about that?
Well, you're right, Nick. As an assistive technology professional and as a physical therapist, you know, I'm quite keen on the use of assistive technology. But what I try and do, you know, as my role as a physical therapist and the ATP is to try and match the appropriate technology, however, to that person's needs. So I just don't throw equipment at people. So, the difference we talked about earlier is, what do people ask a lot? And, they ask me about exercise, but they don't necessarily ask what assistive technology can I use? So I do have to approach it with them. What I try and do in the clinic is have a variety of pieces of equipment that people can try. So, it's not just that they're saying, no, I don't want to see it, I don't want to talk about it. I say, hey, I have this rollator, let's just give it a whirl and see how it goes. So I try and approach it that way. But I do believe that assistive technology can make a huge difference in people's lives. Their ability, go ahead.
I was going to say, because for those watching that might not know what we're talking about, in terms of how would you classify assistive technology? What are we included in that description?
So that's a great question. When I'm thinking of both assistive technology and assistive devices from my world, it's I'm looking at mobility. So being able to move from place to place, or being able to move in bed, or getting around, environmental control or computer access. People are very interested in that a lot. And then the last one would be communication. So those are kind of the three big areas that I look at for assistive technology. And I could do another plug for another webinar on just assistive devices, but each one of us as a team member, the occupational therapists, they have just a variety of devices that can help somebody, because our goal is to keep the person as independent as possible, as safe as possible, for as long as possible, or as long as they want to be. And so we have an arsenal of devices that we can use to help the person do that. And of course, different people want to use them at different times or don't want to use them, but we always have it available, and we're always doing that educational piece. And just finding out a lot, like people who see Steve Gleason, for example, and see all the things that he's using, sometimes that can be, using a person like that can be helpful as well. If you're not familiar, he was a football player in the United States, the American football kind of football, and he uses a lot of technology, and he's been a huge proponent of technology. So there's the assistive technology that you think of, that's the higher end electronic, and then there's assistive devices that would be, I think of like walkers, manual wheelchairs, things like that. I could keep.
And Wendy, what's your experience of how assistive technology and equipment has been used in your part of the world?
The idea of assistive technology is now quite pervasive. So I ask Siri to set the timer by just asking, Alexa, could you bring in, my top 10 favorite songs while I'm cooking. So I think we've all been exposed to assistive technology as it's come into our lives, that the Nest can adjust the temperature. And so this has actually been very empowering, first of all, because people understand that it's out there. Secondly, people with ALS use all these technologies to control their environment. So it could be something as simple as a splint to make your thumb stick out better, so you can still grab things. It could be actually the grabber that a lot of our grandmas use to pick something up. So identifying what level of technology you're comfortable with and how to introduce it to make your life easier is the goal of a lot of the rehab encounters that we have. Assistive technology often we think of as being very technical, and we have in our clinic the low-tech approaches, and we have a special assistive technology department that refers people refer to, or they'll come into the home and help set things up. And it can get up to eye gaze systems, head switches for people who have lost the use of their limbs. So there's a lot of workarounds, is the way I call it in clinic. We look at all the workarounds. We look at the low-tech ones and the high-tech ones to allow you to maintain the important functions in your life, which are communication and control of your environment.
Yeah, and I think you also touched on an important point, that assistive technology is not just to help people do what they need to do, but it also is there to help them do what they want to do. So using the different smart speakers, we have found that it helps even to connect people. So, maybe the person with ALS we'll use an example as being an older grandmother, and now she may not be able to interact the same way with her grandchildren, but now the grandchild can come over, they can ask, if it's Alexa or Google, they can ask it questions, they can ask it riddles together, and it's a different way for them to connect as well.
Totally agree. Yeah, I'm nodding away as you're talking. It takes me back, there's an example of a lady I visited not so long ago who was in a riser recliner chair. That's where she lived most of the time, in her kitchen. And you had all she really had was an iPad, but that was connected to her home, and she was able to answer the door to her carers to come in and open the door, connect with the world, and have some sort of quality of life, really. But that leads me on to, sorry, my brain is getting away, thinking about access, because we're talking to a global audience, and accessibility to these devices isn't always there. I'm going to zoom. I like to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in again on one area, which is voice banking, and it's a subject that's near and dear to my heart. It's something I strongly promote in terms of something that needs to be done as early as possible after diagnosis. Is really, really key. And I've been involved in a project just this last year, creating the first, this is a shameless plug, by the way, the world's first ebook, which you read, and by the time you've finished reading the book, you've banked your voice. And we've developed that with Dell and Intel. It's called I Will Always Be Me. And there's the website, which is, if you type in I Will Always Be Me into your favorite search engine, then you'll find it. But it's only available free of charge in the UK, but we plan to widen that very soon. Also, sorry, another shameless plug is that just to let you know that there's the Alliance is holding a webinar specifically on voice banking soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But I think perhaps we should start with the basics, and perhaps Wendy, I can start with you in terms of what is voice banking and why it's so important.
Yes, this is where, as a neurologist, I'm like, well, let me introduce you to my speech language pathologist. So I advocate for voice banking, not just because people can lose their voice with ALS, but because if we want to express ourselves, we need air as well. And so people with ALS might find that having a device that speaks for them is something they will use even if their voice is strong, because they spend periods on ventilatory support. So they might go into the BiPAP for a rest for their breathing and still want to continue a conversation. So voice banking is simply bringing your voice to a machine or a computer so that when you type, it can speak for you. And I think a lot of us have used this to some extent in this modern world, but maintaining the intonation and accent, we all have accents, and word choices is very important, because we've spent our lives developing our own expressions and our own way of communicating. And you hear that with people. There's code words that families have. And so being able to have those words in your voice is really part of the connection you have with the people you interact with and the people you love.
It really is. That, I think you're right, spot on. That's why we focused on it over here, because speech is personality. It's who we are. It's people's backgrounds, culturally, geographically, and with MND and ALS affecting, I think it's about 80% of people rely on some sort of communication device. it's really important that we maintain personality. So yeah, I fully agree with you.
Mhm.
Sarah.
The only thing I would add, we also refer to our speech language pathologist for the discussion on voice banking, is that we have found that more recently, and like Albert had mentioned, talking with other people with ALS, MND really has moved the voice banking piece forward as well. I mean, as a professional, we can recommend it. Our speech therapists can talk to people about it, but they might not still be proactive about it until, you know, they start to see other people. If you go on some of the different Facebook groups or whatever, and people say, I wish I had voice banked when I still had my voice. And I think that has become a more powerful message to people, speaking to each other to say, these are some things I would have liked to have done or seen or had. And I think with voice banking, we've really seen a difference. We've seen more people now who are willing to do it, willing to try it.
And I think we've heard affecting stories outside of the ALS-MND world, where, for example, someone loses a loved one, but their voice is still on their answering machine, or they have a voicemail from them and they never erase it. And so that underscores the importance of your own voice as a tool of expressing who you are. It's what separates us from the rest of the animals, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's such an important area, and yeah, thanks for giving us your thoughts. I'm just thinking about, so Albert mentioned this. He also talked about being proactive in terms of what the future might require as well. And just thinking about that theme, so how would you address the need to anticipate and be proactive to what might be required in the future? So we've talked about voice banking, but there's other things that we would put into that category, and I'm just keen to get your thoughts on that. Maybe I could start with Sarah.
Yeah, it is really difficult. It's difficult for, we talk about people want to live in the here and now where they are. And I mean, some people want to be very proactive, but many people just want to, like, what can I do right now? So getting to know people ahead of time, like I said, in our clinic is helpful. Having the speech therapist, like we mentioned, meet with a person right away, so they can start planting that seed or talking about voice banking. I'm there, I might meet somebody who's still ambulatory, but I say, if you have any questions about wheelchairs, I'm the person to go to, here's my contact information. So just giving them that information, giving resources. In the United States, we are kind of hobbled a little bit, I would say, by insurance, as well as you can't be too proactive, because you aren't going to be able to get things ahead of time if you haven't medically justified what you need. But we do have the option then for loan closets or loaner equipment, or, like I said, I have trial pieces in the clinic to show. But we try and talk to people and give them resources and education as far as that piece goes, as much as we can.
Wendy? Yeah,
and it's quite interesting how, again, individual people are. So think of the grasshopper and the ant, Aesop's fable, preparing for winter. So I'll use the analogy of, when do you put the winter tires on your car? Like, do you wait for the first snow? Because there are people who do that. So, do you do your shopping for Christmas the night before? So you could put it in the context of, we always have to think ahead in our lives. And there's other reasons. When you have, for example, insurances that will buy one wheelchair, we say, don't get the portable chair. You can borrow that. Save your pennies for the power chair. And then to point out that these days, if you want a Tesla, you have to order it months and months in advance, right? So if you want the best equipment, you have to anticipate and get it lined up for you. Because if it's going to be individualized to you, it takes time and it may take special orders. So putting the positive spin on planning ahead for just the right equipment and to get the right supports is very important. And that's very true about equipment. But even going back to our first visit, we have our social worker talks about insurance. Our rehab doc typically starts the encounter that I read with, you know, so-and-so is a 55-year-old man who lives in a split level house. And we're like, ooh, that's a lot of stairs. So even thinking about where you're living, often people are transitioning in their lives around the time they have the diagnosis. Anyway, people are in their 60s, maybe thinking about retirement, thinking about downsizing. And it's really important to think about where you're going to live, because too often people in their downsizing have moved into a townhouse with three levels and no elevator. So we try and say, you know, heads up, how do you want your environment to be? And all of us have to think about that, because frankly, stairs are not nice on knees. So multi-level homes for people who are retired maybe isn't a good idea anyway. But to think about where you're going to live and how you're going to access where you're going to live. Are you going to think about renovations? That needs planning ahead as well. There's programs that support in our community. The ramp program will subsidize putting in ramps. Our ALS Society will help fund a chairlift. So there's multiple things going to be put in place to allow people to continue to go in and out of their house, to safely go up and down between levels. And so thinking about this as a planning for how you want to live your life maybe makes it seem less like planning for when you become more disabled, which I think is typical that people think of that as a downer. We say it more as, how are you going to maintain control? We want you to feel in charge of your life for the rest of your life. And so we have to plan for that.
I might steal some of these analogies and ideas.
You like the Tesla one?
Well.
I like the dog sled one. I like
The winter tires. Yeah, that's
winter tire.
No, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think we've had a great discussion, haven't we, on learning to live with ALS and MND. And there's one really important aspect of this, of course, which is mental health for both PALS and CALS. And I guess I'm just thinking, are there any warning signals, and what can be done to maintain mental health? I'd be interested in your thoughts. Perhaps I could stick with Wendy and then come back to you, Sarah.
Well, actually, I was going to mention when we were talking about nutrition, loss of appetite is something that we see. And to me, it's a red flag for mood disorder. People get depressed. I think it's pretty normal to feel down when you're experiencing changes in life. And so to take that out and say, here it is, you're feeling down, how are we going to manage this in a way that's consistent with your values? It may be that you prefer some more talk therapy, to say, I wanted to talk this out. You may say, no, I can't ever think of being happy again, which is more like depression that maybe medication would help. Is it that you're feeling like, why me? So this might get into your spiritual values and exploring how spiritually you can feel more centered and more in the world is an aspect of care. We have a pastoral psychologist that we can refer to, who is both a clinical psychologist and a chaplain. And so the why me is an important thing when you're not depressed in the clinical sense, but you're feeling like, how can I go on? And how can this be happening to me? So there's many facets of mental health that go from the need to verbalize things to someone who you don't want to bring down with your thoughts. So that's where professional helps anyone who's affected by ALS. Then there's really more of the clinical depression where medications can help. And then there's the existential component where you really need to say, what are my values? And people who don't identify with a religion still will have strong spiritual values and a strong sense of where they fit in the world. And they may need to explore that with an appropriate supportive listener.
Sarah.
Yeah, it's just like the journey with every other piece that we've mentioned of the multidisciplinary team. We have a mental health specialist and as Dr. Johnston mentioned, she will talk to the person and go on the journey with them and see what tools at any point in that journey would be helpful for them at that point, and maybe refer them out somewhere, maybe, you know, do the other options that they have in their arsenal.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such an important area. We're doing a piece of work at the moment looking at psychological support for those affected, both people living with MND and ALS and their families. So I know access to psychological support is often quite tricky in various different countries. So people become very reliant on other organisations or support or charities, but really important. So here's the best question till last, and then we'll open up to other questions. There's a few that have come in, and I'll invite Albert at that point. But just my last question to you both really was, okay, what would your top 3 tips for someone living with MND and ALS be? And who should I pick first? Wendy.
So I knew this question was coming, and it's only 3. So one would be set your goals, and I referred to that at the first visit, that, you know, who am I going to be and how am I going to be myself with ALS? Build your team. And I think that's really critical to identify that team members will be both formal and informal caregivers, professionals, and other community members. So your team will be as diverse and as individual as you are. And the importance of mental health can't be overemphasized for both family members and the person affected. And I think, you know, you're seeing us on this ALS MND Alliance platform, but connecting with your ALS health charity is really quite important, because they'll connect you with the wider world of people affected by ALS, and peer-to-peer support and peer-to-peer ideas are very important, because they know who the contractor is in your town who does the best job on accessible bathrooms. They'll know which store you can get in. So there's a lot of tips that are not medical, that are not something that we have at our in our clinic, that your peers will have, and that peer-to-peer support is very critical to, I think, living well with ALS.
Thank you, Wendy. And Sarah, what would your top 3 be?
I mean, absolutely. My top one was very similar. You know, build that team around you, and that team may be the multidisciplinary clinic, the ALS MND organization in your area, and then of course your friends, your family, whoever's going to be helping you. That we see makes a difference on the journey. You know, the people you surround yourself with. Also, like Albert had done, do your own research. Like Dr. Johnston just mentioned, that peer-to-peer. So that would be my next tip: is go out there and look for different things, or talk to other people. And then I think my third tip is actually for much more for the healthcare professionals. So if there's anyone, you know, watching this, is listen to the person that you're working with. Really listen to what they're saying to you. Don't just come in and be like, okay, I'm the expert here and I'm going to give you this. Listen to what they're telling you, what they want, what their goals are. So my tip is actually for the other healthcare professionals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for answering my questions today. We still have a little bit of time left. So I know Albert is joining us. He's popped up on my screen. Hopefully he's on your screens at home as well, live from Malaysia. So thank you. I've got no idea what time it is there where you are, but thank you for joining us. There's a couple of questions that have come in the chat, but now that you're here, Albert, having heard today's conversations, just what were your perspectives on some of it? What would you like to comment on any of what you've heard today?
I think one of the things that Dr. Johnston have actually mentioned about peer-to-peer support is very important. And after I was diagnosed with MND ALS in the year of 2018, I kind of gotten a bit of lost. And with all the the wealth of information that were out there, I kind of like got more confused by it. And by speaking to someone with ALS, I think that actually helped me a lot. And a friend of mine, a fellow friend of mine who is actually from Sarawak, and he actually spoke to me, and he kind of like put me into perspective. He asked me to be prepared, to embrace, do not fight the disease, learn to embrace it and learn to live with it. So every day was actually a challenging aspects for me. I would have to learn to adapt to the new changes. I mean, the way I moved up and down the bed and move up and down into the car and so on and so forth. I think that is actually very important. I think what Dr. Johnston have actually mentioned, peer-to-peer support, it is, I would put it first, I think, now that you mentioned it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Please, yeah, carry on.
Now, the other thing that even Sarah have actually mentioned as well about the aspects of the professional listening to you. I think that is also very important. I'm thankful that I've got this team of doctors who are so supportive of us. They don't tell us, look, this is what's going to happen to you in 3 years, in 5 years. They don't tell us that. But the one thing that my specialist have informed me, she says that, well, I'm sure you've been reading a lot and you've been doing your own research and you've been doing a lot of things and everything. But it is important that we must not be putting in negative thoughts into a patient. But I think it is important that a doctor needs to just listen to them and just be supportive and also to help them to pace themselves, or rather to kind of like chart the journey in which they're going to be going. I think that's very important as well.
And how is the access to multidisciplinary care in Malaysia? Are there any problems, issues that you face and access to some of the stuff that you need?
In Malaysia, I'm just considered to be very lucky and blessed because I'm actually living in a place where it's not too far from where I go to. There is actually the UMMC, where Prof. Tina is, and that is actually the center in which that's the only center that is the multidiscipline clinic that we have in the whole of Malaysia. So those from the Klang Valley, or rather the Kuala Lumpur, as well as from Selangor, they would actually come to this particular clinic. And then even some as far as maybe 3 hours journey for away, they would also have to drive there as well. But I believe that Prof. Tina and the team are actually looking into expanding. They're actually looking into making plans to introduce all the multidiscipline to all the clinics, or rather all the hospitals all around Malaysia. I think that is actually exactly what they're trying to do now.
And maybe virtual has a place there as well.
Yes,
virtual support.
That's right. I think maybe that is actually something that they can be looking at as well.
There was a question that did come into the chat, Albert, for you, which was asking, how was your family adjusted to living with ALS?
Okay. Well, I have to actually say this. My grandma has dementia, severe case of dementia. My dad has Parkinson, and my daughter actually, she has a juvenile chronic arthritis. And initially, I thought that is actually, it runs in the family. So, but however, after a few tests, it shows that it is not familial. So, and it is actually just a distinct case of an MND that actually approached me. And what my family has done is that I kind of like make it, they have learned to accept it, and they have learned to see that, well, if I'm okay with it, if I'm showing that I'm learning to live with it, I'm learning to embrace it, I'm learning to just cope with whatever difficulties that they try their best to accommodate everything that I'm actually going through. And I believe that they are, unless of course they're hiding their true feelings from me, but I believe that they are very, very pretty supportive of me in everything.
Good. I'm glad you've got that network as well, which is good.
That's right. Yes.
The other questions, I'm open to all of you, of course. These questions, they're quite big questions, but the first one was, how would you address the question of, I'm going to pass the disease on to my kids? Maybe Wendy, perhaps that's a question that you receive quite often, I would imagine.
And that popped into the box as we were talking about the first visit, and it's true. Many people say, is this hereditary? Which is in fact a bigger conversation, because in general, people with ALS do not pass ALS on to their children. The majority of people with ALS do not. But there are families where ALS runs in the family, one generation to the next. And then emerging data about genetic susceptibilities to ALS and other degenerative diseases makes that conversation even more nuanced. And if you expand out to say, well, in your family, much as Albert said, having a family member with dementia is not that unusual. Is there someone with Parkinson's in the family? So I think you can say, well, in your family, it doesn't sound like ALS runs in the family, so your children are not going to get your disease. What we're learning is how your personal genetics may influence your risk for these diseases. And the reason to think about that is we're moving into the era of personalized medicine. And I think there'll be a day when your genetic makeup will determine which therapies you're on. That's certainly true in cancer. Which genetic expressions are in the cancer determines which therapies you're on. And I think that very much could come into play in neurodegenerative disorders like ALS.
Thank you, Wendy. And then the other one, which is just as big a question, was why is there still no cure? There you go, discuss.
I actually, when people say, wasn't there cure? I say, well, what do we cure? I have migraine. We don't cure migraine. Cancers, there's some cancers you cure, but there's actually relatively few diseases that we cure. But there's a lot of diseases we have a huge impact on. I mean, even if you go back to the cancer example, people with metastatic cancer can live long, full lives because of containment of the disease. So I think that while cure is a blue sky goal, it's still something we hope that we can go in and just find the little keyhole, put the key in and turn off the disease. Can we reverse it? That would be even better. But I think that if we only focus on cure, then we might be missing important things that can improve quality of life right now, can improve longevity and good life now. So I think that if we only hold out for cure, we're robbing ourselves of the opportunity to live longer and live better with ALS that is still there.
Thank you. Sarah, would you like to add anything to that? Well, Albert, of course. Probably it's okay not.
I was gonna say,
on the spot.
I'm very hopeful for that cure. I like again. I love these analogies where you put the key in and turn it off. And, you know, as part of my role is much more of the care. You know, I keep pushing all the things that I learn, everything that all the education that I try and do or try and get is to make the care that I give better for the people living with ALS MND.
Yeah, and every organisation supporting people with MND or ALS always have the vision is a world free from ALS or MND, and I know there's so much effort and resource going into finding treatments and a cure that there's a lot happening. You know, we have come a long way when you sort of look back at the last 30 years of the alliance, but yeah, there's still some way to go. But there's another question has just come in actually, which is it's geared to you, Wendy, but others may want to answer. So can you talk about how you support people with ALS who don't have family or other close relatives, I suppose, to share their journey and support them?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm surprised that how many people who come in and say, no, I don't have anyone, actually do. So to say to the person, are you open to support? You've always been very independent. There may be people in your life who are happy to jump in, but we have had people whose family for some reason did not support them, or they were alone, or they unfortunately their caregiver had an illness and passed away before they did. So we do have resources in our community for professional caregivers. And again, people with ALS have been very adept at identifying and teaching caregivers to be their personal caregiver. And so there's we do have a group of professional caregivers who are quite oriented to caring for people with ALS, and we try and bring those interested people in. There's community resources, there's identifying where the supports are in an individual town, village, city is part of how I think the ALS MND health charities and also the ALS clinics seek to find out what part of the web, what part of the network can be activated for individuals who don't have an obvious caregiver in their life.
Thank you, Wendy. We're just at the top of the hour and a quarter, so I'm going to have to bring it to an end there. But I've had a wonderful time today. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for taking time out to join us today. I will take the opportunity while I've got the screen just to invite you to register for the third and final webinar in this series, which is a difficult but important topic on end of life. So do register for that. And thank you to all our participation, all of our participants. That's what I'm trying to say today. I got all the way to the end and then failed at the last hurdle, didn't I? But so thank you so much. And I'll turn back to Kathy for a final wrap up, I believe.
Thank you, Nick. I think Wendy had her finger up. I think you wanted to say one other thing, Wendy, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, in the chat is the Canadian best practice recommendations, and particularly for those who don't have a multidisciplinary clinic, it was created for all healthcare professionals as a roadmap, if you like, about what would constitute the best care. And it was written not just for specialists, but for any practitioner, nurse practitioner, or family practitioner to identify what components could create the best of care for people with ALS. So I invite you to look at that open access article and bring it to your healthcare professional if you don't have a team already in place.
Thank you, Wendy, for drawing our attention to that. And thank you to all our panelists today. Thank you, Albert, for sharing your thoughts and for kicking off this important conversation. Thank you to Sara and Wendy as panelists, and thank you, Nick, as a moderator. And once again, I'd like to thank our industry partners, Amylyx and Biogen, for their support of being able to put this webinar series on. I hope everyone has a great day or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.